Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to another Red Pill Religion podcast, where amongst the things we say are that atheism in 2019 is not lack of organized political and religious cult movement. If you like the kind of work we do here, please support our work on redpillreligion.com. If you want to help us financially, which is appreciated, those recurring or single PayPal donations and Bitcoin donations are appreciated. Patreon and Subscribestar are both appreciated. And yes, we do sell merchandise. Early reviews on the t-shirts is really good. So check them out. You can find all that on redpillreligion.com. Also find us on Gab, Dissenter, and all your favorite social media. And in any case, I'm proud to say that again tonight, our guest is Dr. E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones is the editor of Culture Wars magazine, which I'm showing on the screen here now. This is it a quarterly publication?
No, monthly.
Monthly publication, only $4 an issue, which isn't bad at all. I have to admit, I may need to subscribe to it, to be honest, because that's not expensive. And the content so far of everything I've seen is fantastic. Now, people here who've been following us on Red Pill Religion the last 3-4 years know that we are the bête noire. I can never say it right. The bête noire of the atheist movement. We have been in open combat with them over the internet for a few years now, and we know a lot about it. However, I've seen that in the October 2017 issue of Culture Wars magazine, Michael had a very interesting article on the rise and fall of the new atheism. Now, I want to ask him. A few questions about that. The biggest thing that I get out of every comment I've heard you in talking about the new atheism, sir, is just how when we look at Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett, and Harris, how intellectually vapid they all are. I'm astounded at the weakness of their arguments, and frankly, I've often been astounded by how weak their debate opponents appear to be. Although that leads to another question. I've heard you do this a few times, and I love the way you do it. Please, if you could, for the audience, explain in a way that a 12-year-old could understand it why there has to be a God.
Okay, I was in India, traveling around from one place to another. Got to Delhi and was introduced to a class of 16-year-olds. And gave a little talk in English. Now the teacher said, any questions? And a 16-year-old Hindu boy stood up and asked me, can you prove the existence of God? And I said, yes, I can. Now this was a Catholic school, but 80% of the students are Hindus. And they live in a country that has a religion that worships monkeys, snakes, just about anything. There are 33 million gods in India. And so that's the one side of the world he's confronted with. He's growing up in that world. There can't be 33 million gods, but that's the world he lives in. And on the other hand, you can go to a place like the Nehru Science Center, which I went to when I was in Mumbai, and you can see a picture of the entire universe. So you have religion on the one hand, which worships snakes and monkeys. And on the other hand, you have science. And science, the beginning of everything says atoms formed. Well, that doesn't work. That does not work. You can't just say atoms formed. You could have written shit happens.
Right.
And it would have been about as scientific as saying that atoms form. So I said to the kid, yes, I can. So I said, nothing precedes. There was never nothing. Because if there were ever nothing, there could never be something. Because nothing can come from nothing. That which is, said Parmenides, cannot come from that which is not. Okay, there is something. It's obvious. All you have to do is look around. This something could not bring itself into existence because it would have to exist before it existed, and that's impossible. Therefore, something else had to bring this something into existence, and that other thing is what all men call God. That was the proof. At that point, he nodded his head I said, any other questions? And he said, yes, is time travel possible? So I said, yes, it is possible because I just came from the future. And if you want to know what India is going to be like, ask me what America is like now, and I'll tell you that. So anyway, that was the whole thing in a nutshell. A young man who had an inquiring mind, who wanted to know, who lived in a world that did not make sense, either from the religious point of view or from the scientific point of view. It didn't make sense. And he was stuck in the middle. So now I hope it makes sense to him. Now, the fact is that the human reason, unaided by any type of faith or revelation, can understand that God is necessary. Mm-hmm. If there is something, then God is necessary. It's the only possible explanation for something, for anything. And since God is necessary, atheism is irrational.
It is.
And since it's irrational, you can't deal with it as an ontological argument or an ontological issue. You have to deal with it as a psychological issue. And that's one of the things that I went into in that discussion of the four new atheists.
The four horsemen. Yeah. I don't want to go too far into comparative theology, but don't more advanced Hindus have this idea of the Brahma, the great mind that's dreaming everything else in existence?
Yes.
I mean,
and they also had, in the Vedas, they had a concept called irta, which is a kind of form of logos. Mm-hmm. An understanding that there was a rational basis for the universe. There was some type of rational spirit pervading the universe. But for some reason, it did not prevail. That did not prevail, and Logos died in India. It just didn't happen. In many ways, I'm writing a history of Logos and the Logos of history. And in many ways, the question is, why didn't it die everywhere? Because it didn't die everywhere. It succeeded in one place, and it died pretty much every place else. But India is the classic example of a culture where Logos did not prevail, where it died a death a long time ago. I had contact, well, obviously being over there, I had contact with Indians, but it was mostly within the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is the vehicle of Logos in India because it's the vehicle of Logos in the world. But because of my talks on the internet, one Indian contacted me. And I got into a discussion of Logos about India, in India. And I brought up, I said, well, obviously, if we're talking, that's Logos, that's the most basic form. But I said, it died there. The development of Logos died. It did not develop. And so he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, look at the Indian cosmos, the picture of the Indian cosmos. There's the semicircle. The Earth is a semicircle. It's resting on the back of 4 elephants, and those 4 elephants are standing on a turtle. And then I said, what's the turtle standing on? And he said to me, I don't know. Now, if he had studied philosophy at Cambridge, he would have known that the answer to that is it's turtles all the way down. But that's not an answer either. You can't have turtles all the way down. It's related to the argument I just made. You cannot have that. So as a result, because he could not answer the question what the turtle is standing on, he converted to Catholicism. So don't say that anyone, the philosophical arguments don't convert people. They do convert people. And this is right now, in my opinion, having traveled all around the world, the urgent question is, what is Logos, and how is it the basis of everything that we do? We are now at a point where we're coming to some type of universal recognition that there has to be a Logos, and that this is the antidote to the chaos that we see all around us, much of it spread by the American empire.
I can't disagree with much of that. If I were to opine, although I'd like to move away from Hinduism, I can't stop myself from opining that, the monotheist idea, if you start, basically, I think what Hinduism tends to do is tends to accept the idea that there are multiple truths and that things can be both true and false at the same time, which is kind of not entirely compatible with the concept of the Logos as we have it. That's kind of how I see it, because there seems to be this strong embracing in what we call the Eastern religion of these, these nebulous states of not quite true, not quite false, both true and false. I think they call it the left hand path and then the right hand. And whereas when you have the idea of the Logos, you accept that, well, there may be some times when it's mysterious, but there absolutely is a true and false condition. And I think a lot of those religions lack that idea, that there's an absolute true or false.
A lot of this stuff gets lost in the sense of process, and then process becomes circular motion, and circular motion becomes the eternal return. And then you're talking about reincarnation. And at that point, you just get lost in the cosmos. Your life, time doesn't have any meaning. Your life doesn't have any meaning. It's all just lost in some type of flux. In order to emerge from that, you're right. One of the things you have to understand is the principle of non-contradiction, which means that things can't be both true and false in the same way, in the same place, in the same time. That was Aristotle's contribution. And Aristotle wrote a book called The Metaphysics, which deals with these fundamental principles. Now, one of the fundamental problems of the four atheists, the famous four atheists, is that they are ignoramuses when it comes to metaphysics.
Yes. In fact, they joke, they when asked about it, they all disparage it, which is just...
Yeah, they think it's like the occult. They think it's like reading tarot cards or some type of mysticism. It is not that. It is not mysticism. It is the most basic understanding of being. It is the science of being. It is first philosophy. Aristotle called it theology as well, because when you're talking about being qua being, you're talking about God. And when you're talking about things coming into being, you have to invoke God. There is because that is known as creation, and creation is not change. And this is something that the atheists don't understand at all, because they all have been schooled in Darwinism.
Wait a minute. I want you just said something that could be, creation is not change?
Creation is not change. Creatio non est cambio. It's not change, because change means going from one state to another, and creation means going from no state to a state. So it's completely different than change.
Oh, see, now I was always taught that creation is a continuous process. Okay. Maybe
no, it's not. It cannot be a continuous process.
Okay.
This, again, where Logos did develop is in Greece, oddly enough. Logos is a Greek word.
Right.
Okay. And we had a man by the name of Parmenides, who was a genius, one of the greatest geniuses in the history of Logos, the history of philosophy. And Parmenides said that that which is cannot come from that which is not. That's
right.
Absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And if there's one thing that the four Darwinist atheists don't understand, is that statement of Parmenides. They violate it continually, constantly.
Well, what's happened in organized atheism, and I think this is an important thing to use the phrase organized atheism, because what I think a lot of people miss in the Four Horsemen is they think the significance of the Four Horsemen was the Four Horsemen themselves. If you dig deeply into the history of those four men, they were part of a planned, paid-for propaganda campaign. And the propaganda campaign was to popularize being anti-Christian in the United States. And I can say that with again, I have a source that I've mentioned before. I push it at people all the time because this is a suppressed book, but from an impeccable academic publisher and an impeccable source, Gordon Painter. He served as an expert witness in a UK libel court, accusing somebody of propagandistic fake history. And if you know how UK libel court works, it's almost impossible for a defendant to win in UK libel court. But he was victorious because he was able to show use of propagandistic history techniques to simply lie and use dodgy techniques. He's an expert on this subject. He's also the retired chair of the history department and the retired president of Trinity College up there in New England. And he documents in excruciating detail how 3 of the horsemen, Daniel Dennett, no, not Daniel Dennett, that 3 of them, in other words, the 3 who are not Daniel Dennett, which is to say Harris, Dawkins, and Hitchens, all colluded to use the methodologies used by both Goebbels in Germany and Stalin in Russia to create propagandistic fake history and fake science even, but especially fake history, using communist groups and working with them. And in some cases perjuring or even plagiarizing straight out of something that was called the League of the Militant Godless. The League of the Militant Godless was a cult club movement started by Stalin in the Soviet Union, which mostly recruited fatherless young men with no prospects in life and brought them into this club. Basically, it was gangs. It was occultish gangs. And they fed them a lot of propaganda, like religion is the cause of all the problems in the world. Religion is against science. Religion is against progress. Religion is irrational. Religion is dangerous. Religion is a mental illness. Religion has to be stamped out. Fed basically marginalized young men, and some women, but marginalized young men with no hope in life, the message that everything wrong in their world was caused by religion, and then set them loose. They had intellectuals who would give speeches and publish tracts, and they had thugs who would go out and rape nuns and kill priests and burn down churches and terrorize the countryside and mock people. And they did it all in the name of atheism. They didn't do it in the name of communism. They didn't do it in the name of socialism. They didn't do it in the name of Stalin. They did it specifically in the name of atheism, under the umbrella of the idea that religion is evil, superstitious, bad, and that the only way we're going to have a better future is to destroy them, is to destroy religion. And there's young people today who still talk like this. I'm going to keep talking a little bit, but I'm going to mention a film that we've tried to support, which people are trying to get this made, Martyred in the USSR, which is a documented history of religious persecution in the USSR, done always in the name of atheism, not in the name of Karl Marx, not in the name of communism. And between 10 and 11 million Orthodox Christians and some Orthodox Jews too, by the way, were just murdered in the name of atheism for this, using the same sort of rhetoric and same fake history methods used by Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens by name. And it's outrageous because Painter is an impeccable source on this. You can't, he's bulletproof. He's a historian's historian. He's got like 2 books you can buy on Amazon, but about 40 or 50 papers published in some of the most prestigious peer-reviewed history journals in the world. This was a propaganda campaign, Dr. Jones. There was no philosophical heft there on purpose, because the audience wasn't you. The audience, the intended audiences, was for a mass pop culture audience. And what I can tell you also happened is that at the same time that they came out, which, you know, a little over 10 years ago, there was launched something called the Campaign to Take the Internet for Atheism, or for Rationalism. And that brought in at the same time, because remember, this was the mid-2000s, so everybody wasn't on the internet, except kids were. And so coexistence with this was the creation of YouTube atheism and internet atheism, with clubs all over the internet modeled on the Stalin's League of the Militant Godless, doing the same thing, recruiting young people, mostly men, feeding them the same Stalinist garbage, all 100 years out of date and unchanged from 100 years ago. And I meet young people every day who now spout these talking points that the new atheists were doing 10 years ago. It's percolated down into the low culture, sir, and it's causing people to, it's one of the main things that causes people to hate us as Christians, especially as Catholics, because there was an invasion of YouTube celebrities, names like the Cult of Dusty and TJ Kirk, the Amazing Atheist, a whole bunch of them, and they were funded. They acted like they were grassroots, but they were clearly funded and connected. And they terrorized Christians off of YouTube, and they terrorized people off of, they still work to terrorize Christians off of Twitter. It's still happening in organized gangs. And some of these people get involved in doing it for cash. it's actually still a very live phenomenon. Everybody who's followed it intellectually knows the new atheists were a joke at this point. There's nothing defensible in any of their work. Although still nobody will call out Sam Harris, who's a fraud and a liar. I mean, he's straight up a con artist, as bad as any historical revisionist who ever lived. And he's pumped out a lot of pseudoscience too, and it's proven. You can't get anybody outraged about it. Now, that was a lot to just throw at you, but I'm here to tell you, Dr. Jones, new atheism lives on in the culture because it was part of a campaign to educate and indoctrinate basically public school educated kids into thinking atheism was cool. And a lot of them did.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised by what you say. What I found interesting was your mention of fatherless children. Because I said before that atheism is not an ontological problem; it's a psychological problem. And Paul Vitz, the psychologist who used to teach at NYU, wrote a book called "Faith of the Fatherless," in which he talked about all of these prominent atheists and the fact that they had problems with their fathers. This is Sigmund Freud once said that God is an exalted father. He's absolutely right, but not in the way he intended. In other words, he used that as a way of saying that there is no God. But no, what the truth of the statement is that you get your idea from God from your father. And if you have a defective father in some way, you perceive of him as defective or weak or inadequate, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble placing your trust in God. Now, there's similarities here between this and homosexuality. Homosexuality, the cause of homosexuality is also father related. It's father deprivation.
Yeah, that's not real popular today, but they've been trying to push this "you're born with it" stuff. But in point of fact, I've been watching for 25 years now. And up until 10 years ago, I was still believing it was genetic because even 5 years ago, maybe the popular press just kept repeating the mantra that it's genetic, but there's no evidence for that.
No. And so you have, I live in South Bend, Indiana, and our illustrious mayor here, who announced he was homosexual a few years back, is now running for president of the United States of America. He would have been laughed out of court, but there's only one reason why he didn't, as running for the highest office in the land from South Bend, Indiana. Why not Kokomo? Why not Mishawaka? These cities are run better than South Bend. The answer to that is because he's a homosexual. And that has made his career, and he got into this fight with the vice president now, who was then governor of the state of Indiana, where he said that basically, God made me this way. Your argument is with my creator. Now, this was really one of the funny things about the internet is that you have comment boxes. So as soon as he says this, the first comment is, "Don't blame God, you faggot."
Ouch. Ouch.
So next thing I know, here's this guy's, the guy he calls his husband, whatever that means. He goes on and he gives this absolutely speech before the Homosexual Rights Commission that makes your skin crawl. And then you think, wow, what are the comments going to be? You scroll down, the comments have been disabled. So here he is trying to say that the argument is with my creator. No, we know that. And we know it's not genetic. There's no proof whatsoever. It is father deprivation. That is the only theory that makes sense. And the proof of that, the proof of the effectiveness of this theory is reparation therapy. A therapy created by a man, Joe Nicolosi, who is now dead, but had been pioneered by other people, Jeff Satinover from Connecticut, other people as well. And the proof that it's effective is that the state of California banned it. It's now illegal to do reparation therapy. What is reparation therapy? It's basically trying to make up for the father deficit. The therapist becomes the man who affirms the homosexual's masculinity without sexually exploiting it, which is what happens to homosexuals. Okay,
without sexually exploiting him or without abusing him or treating him like,
right.
well, maybe right. Kicking him in the ass once in a while when he needs it, but yeah.
what you have normally is that the father deprivation causes the young man to be withdrawn. He feels inadequate. He feels he doesn't fit in anywhere. He's like the classic kitchen window child who sits at home and looks out the window and wonders why everybody's out there playing and having fun and he's not. Instead of what the older homosexuals know how to pick these people out, and they seek them out. This guy Sandusky at Penn State had the whole psychology department at Penn State working on this for him. So single out these people and then sexually exploit them. And then you sexualize their desire. And then what you have is a vicious habit that ensues from this. And then once the person realizes he's powerless to defeat this habit, he identifies with his disease. He identifies with his unruly passions. And then you have the official homosexual movement. And you have someone like the mayor of South Bend being a crusader for this movement and running for president. Now, the point I'm trying to make here, too, is that there are political consequences for this because these homosexuals become the loyal servants of the oligarchs. They are the people who do the oligarchs' bidding in exchange for official approval of their bad habit.
Well, yes, and I don't want the whole show to be on this, but I think I want to come back and talk to you another time about the gay issue because I got a lot of thoughts on that. I want to pull back to the atheist thing because there's a few things to say and a few things to observe and ask you about in a different direction. It is actually true what you said. Research psychologist Paul Vitz did find both by profiling every prominent famous atheist he could found they all had terrible father relationships or no father relationships or weak, terrible fathers or even abusive fathers, but usually absent ones. But also extensive surveys of people who join atheist organizations, above which there are quite a few. There are organizations. I mean, they're kind of falling apart, but they do have multimillionaire funding. Gee, I wonder from who. Over 90% of those who get involved in atheism as a cause, because it is a cause. They've still like the League of the Militant Godless is alive and well in the United States right now, and alive and well all over the internet on things like Atheist Republic and Iron Chariots and every other atheist-oriented Facebook group, at least any of the big ones. They're all new iterations of the League of the Militant Godless, and they're trying to train young people to treat us like garbage and kill us. That's genuinely what I believe they're all about, or to normalize mistreatment of Christians. But, you know, more than 90% of them are fatherless men with not much hope in life. They're also much more likely to suicide. They're much more likely to be drug addicted. They're much more likely to go to jail. And if you look at the new atheist material and what's in the internet forums, they lie. They tell you that atheists almost never go to jail, that atheists are not violent, that they have no particular mental health problems, and they lie. And you know how they lie. This is all tied to the Four Horsemen. They lie by telling people, impressionable kids who came out of the public schools, so they're young schools full of much. They inform them that most scientists are atheists, that people who are religious have lower IQs, that the atheist is naturally higher IQ. Well, they don't say that exactly, but they weasel it to imply that even if your measured IQ is low, if you're an atheist, you're going to be smarter.
If you need to disprove that,
they groom them. I'm sorry, what?
If you need to disprove that point, all you have to do is point to the four atheists. They make some of the stupidest statements I have ever read in print.
That's right. The
only philosopher among those four atheists was Daniel Dennett, and he's
an inferior one.
He's famous for the statement. It's the universe brought itself into existence out of nothing or something very small. That has got to be the dumbest statement in the history of philosophy.
It is.
It's got to be. It's got to be. How can an intelligent person say something that stupid? First of all, Professor Dennett, if the universe brought itself into existence, it had to exist before it existed, didn't it? Well, if that, how can you exist before you exist? I don't understand that. That's impossible. And then on top of that, so he makes this bold statement. It created itself out of nothing. Okay, great bold statement. And then he qualifies it by saying, or something very small. Well, that's preposterous. If it's something very small, it exists.
And I'm going to tell you something.
It's not out of nothing. It's already in existence. Now, how stupid can you be?
This is an ongoing pattern that people need to recognize, because there's been this terrible tendency to treat these guys seriously because they have science degrees. And, you know, the proper person says science, that doesn't mean they know philosophy or theology, and they don't. But they've created this veneer of formidableness and Futurian, you know, brave, daring, because they're scientists. None of the four horsemen are impressive as scientists at all. Daniel Dennett, I mean, my field is IT, and I've been in it in various ways since the 70s, actually. And Daniel Dennett has respectable but not particularly great accomplishments in his field of AI, and has made many scientific assertions that he cannot back up, and that he will never be able to back up, and predictions that he couldn't make. As a computer scientist, he's a mediocrity at best. So he's not smart as a computer scientist particularly. He's not dumb, but he's not that bright as a computer scientist in AI. And in philosophy, he's an idiot, as you just demonstrated.
He's an ignoramus. That has got to be one of the dumbest statements in the history of philosophy.
So just read Richard Dawkins' Ultimate 747 argument, and that actually manages to be dumber. But speaking of which, I'm going to it's important that people recognize this. Richard Dawkins is not respectable as an evolutionary biologist at this point. He truly is not. Any contribution he made of significance to evolutionary biology was 40 years ago and more, and almost all of his work, not all of it, but most of his work, especially Selfish Gene, and his wacky mimetic theory, which he had to withdraw and admit just had no basis. He had this thing called mimetic theory, that basically bad ideas like religion are a virus, and a mind virus. And that's where memes came from, and something called mimetic theory. It's interesting how he managed to get away with this too. He eventually officially withdrew after more than 10 years and a number of attempts to prove it with peer-reviewed research and volunteers. They could find nothing to it, and they had to simply withdraw it and say it had no merit. But another theory with a similar name called mimetics is a respected field of study. So he's gotten away with the fact that essentially Selfish Gene is pseudoscience. His main theory is pseudoscience. He's laughable as a scientist, and has been for decades. He has made no significant contribution in decades, and he's an idiot in his own field. In 2012, a lady named Lynn Margulis, one of the greatest evolutionary biologists who ever lived, showed how eukaryotic cells evolved. It was amazing. Showed also how Selfish Gene theory is total garbage and ridiculous, and does not describe how evolution works at all from the perspective of an evolutionary biologist. He's toast as a scientist. Lawrence Krauss, the famous physicist, who's made all sorts of ridiculous philosophical assertions about God and wrote his A Universe for Nothing. His fellow physicists call it abusive language and say he's an idiot as a physicist, and that he's not honest with his language. Every prominent atheist who has a science degree can be shown to be a nothing or outright incompetent. Richard Carrier, the famous atheist historian, can be shown to be a complete pseudo-scholar too, which should tell you everybody something important. This was an astroturfed planned campaign, because what they're doing is taking students educated in the public schools very poorly, fatherless kids especially, and filling their heads with a bunch of garbage that isn't true. And I meet people now who think religion is a mental illness because of these people. It's a serious threat, actually, and I don't know exactly what to do about it, but I think Christians need to start realizing that the problem with modern atheism right now, as of today, is not that young atheists are just confused and insensitive. Quite a few of them have been trained to hate us. And I encounter them all the time on social media now, and sometimes in real life. And they've been trained to hate us. And they've been trained like to think backwards. Like that proof you just gave that there has to be a God, which is airtight, by the way. They've never heard it and wouldn't know. What am I trying to say? And I should stop rambling and let you get in. But Aristotle also observed, I think, that the vast majority of people were not very bright and were easy to manipulate. They've been manipulated into atheism. It's actually quite terrifying. And I don't know what to do about it except start identifying it, because really,
if you're going to call yourself an atheist, you don't need that as an excuse to hate people. I mean, you can hate people for any reason you want. But if you're going to say that you're a new atheist and that atheism compels you to act in a certain way, well, if you demolish atheism, then they have no basis for action. So that's the end of the story. That's what needs to be done. That's basically what you need to do, is clear the ground. This is the first chapter in the book on Logos. It's basically, I have to clear the ground here. I have to state that there are certain things that are part of the universe. God is not part of the universe, but he created the universe. And because God created it, and God is Logos, there are going to be traces of Logos in the universe and everything else that he created, including us, in a more specific way, by way of reason. Now, none of this can be touched by biology. I mean, biology just can't talk about what I'm just talking about. And one of the main problems here is that these scientists are all using the same biology. It's all Darwinism. Of the 4 people I read, every single appeal is going to be to some type of Darwinism.
Yeah, they've made a religion out of Darwinism, because I can even tell you that there are, quite a few evolutionary biologists actually who believe in evolution, who find the way these people talk about evolution to be like insane. It
is an article of faith. I had a friend in the history department at Notre Dame, and he spent about 20 years of his life trying to convert me to Darwinism. And I spent about 20 years of my life trying to convert him to Catholicism. But in the middle of this thing, I'm out of town, and my son is visiting, and his in-laws are with him. And his father-in-law is a marine biologist.
Mm-hmm.
So Sam walks over to the house, kind of walks in, plunks himself down on the sofa, and there's Yuri. And Sam says, "Who are you?" And Yuri says, I'm Adam's father-in-law. And then Sam says, "Oh, you're Adam's father-in-law. Do you know that Adam's father?" And then he says, What do you do for a living?" He says, "I'm a biologist." And then Sam says, "Oh, do you know that Adam's father, namely me, doesn't believe in evolution?" And Yuri says, "I don't either." So I wish I'd been there to see the expression on Sam's face. But this is kind of typical. This is like one step removed. Now you have somebody in the history department citing bad biology as proof that that God doesn't exist, or that the universe brought itself into existence, or one preposterous claim after another. So then Sam would say to me, "Well, you have to believe in evolution to get hired in the biology department at Notre Dame." Well, yeah, you had to believe in Lysenko to get hired in the psychology department in the Soviet Union too. Yeah, that didn't mean it was true, did it?
In fact, even though I am not a creationist in the normal sense of the word, I guess you could call me a theistic evolutionist. I'm not that wedded to it. I understand evolution just fine. Even when I was an atheist, this is actually what started getting me out of atheism and make me thinking there's something wrong with atheists. That really is what got me out of atheism, because I was stuck as one for a long time, and still I just started noticing how nutty so many atheists were. And I think it's important to do this too. I literally noticed how much evolution was such an article of faith, not just an article of faith, but an article of faith that required you to hurt people and drive them away in some way. And it It was like the parody of what the Spanish Inquisition was supposed to be like. Heresy, you are not allowed to question. And I'm like, listen, I grew up, I was an atheist, and I was having this argument. I grew up, and my heroes, guys like Richard Feynman, and he would, and others, and he would tell you what you're saying is nuts. You're treating this like a religious dogma. You can't do that. That's not science. And I got pilloried so hard. I'm like, what is wrong with this? They've made a religion out of it, a really dogmatic cult out of it too. And I think there's real value in pointing that out. I actually think I've had a number of people tell me that, they got out of atheism because they basically noticed they had joined a cult. And I think more people pointing out that it is at this point a cult religious network, and also just something your teachers indoctrinate you in. They indoctrinate you in with lousy science. They give you lousy history. They give you fake history and fake science.
The issue is not really evolution. The issue is atheism.
Yes, it's denial of a rational proposition.
That's
even
right.
If you don't go to Jesus, even if you can't get to Jesus.
The point here is that if you believe in God, well, then what's the problem with evolution? There's no problem with evolution. If God created the world, why can't he create it in a way that would allow certain things to happen in certain ways?
Yes,
there is evolution, for example, from an acorn to an oak. An acorn certainly does not look like an oak, okay? But there is potential within this thing that allows it, under certain conditions, to develop into something completely different, okay? It depends. So the real problem is atheism. It's not evolution.
The real problem is, yes, I believe they push evolution so hard. And by the way, don't anybody tell me I just stopped believing in evolution, because I didn't. I'm saying I would. Sir, are you still there?
I'm here. I couldn't hear you before this.
I just dropped. I don't know where I dropped off, but I was probably rambling too much. Let me just take off on a quick. You must have gone to Catholic school as a kid, right?
I did, yes.
Okay. Did you ever? This is something I think young men need, and it goes back to the fatherlessness thing. You must have had some really smart instructors who were terrors to their stupid students. Do you know what I mean? The teacher, like, you just said something stupid, and the teacher told you said something stupid. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because those teachers do not exist anymore. Why? Because they're all women, and everybody's supposed to feel good. Some of the best teachers I ever had, were like a couple I can think of, were monks who would routinely say things like, "What do you that was a really dumb answer. Get the shit out of your ears and listen carefully to me. I cut my question again." First time I heard a teacher talk like that was from a monk in a Catholic school. But man, they helped you learn. And I think young men especially, kind of need to be told, this atheism thing is dumb. Because, by the way, it's dumb to be an atheist. It's really rockhead dumb, especially if you're a follower of the Four Horsemen. That's just me ranting, but I just want to put it out there, man. People seem to think we need to persuade people. We do, to a certain extent, need to persuade, but really, not suffering fools needs to be something we have more of.
Well, you have to be effective in your ability to persuade. We have nothing but the ability to persuade, because we have no power, we have no influence. We are a voice in the wilderness that is being tolerated for the moment. And we're making good use of it. I think people are changing their mind on a regular basis, because what we do have is the power of the truth. You can talk all you want, but if it's not true, it's not true. And eventually the people find out and they become dissatisfied, and you can't force them to say that believe something is true when they know that it's false. It's just
no. But you can point out to people that atheism is dumb and indefensible, because it is. It's totally rationally, logically indefensible. The best atheists now these days I'm seeing are slowly moving toward pantheism, just because it allows them an escape hatch, because you really can't sustain hard atheism rationally. Can't be done. But in the meantime, we have religion's not going to go away, and I forgot the point I was going to make, but we really need young men, especially, to start learning and teaching the rational arguments for God, because that's what young people need to hear. It is not rational to be an atheist. It is not rational to be anti-religious either. They are teaching young people that religion is the cause of irrationality and is against science, when the church built all the universities in Europe and is responsible for most of our science.
Yeah, Pierre Duhem said that modern science began in 1277 when the Bishop Etienne Tempier of Paris condemned Averroism. He claimed that was the beginning. Averroism was rearing its ugly head. This was the doctrine of two truths. Whether Averroes held it or not, there were people in Paris at the time of St. Thomas Aquinas who held it. It was basically a claim. C.J. of Brabant was on the faculty at that point, and he was a philosophy professor. And he said, look, my job is philosophy. I'm teaching Aristotle. He said that the world's eternal. I know you believe that Genesis said it was created in time, but that's not my job. That's above my pay grade, as Obama would say.
Sure.
And so therefore, we're just going to have some type of peace here. And you believe what you believe, and I believe what I believe. I'm okay, you're okay, and let's just leave it at that. Well,
yeah.
the bishop was smart enough to realize we can't do that. We just can't. There's a contradiction here. You know, some people say it was Averroes who basically ran up the white flag. In Islam, for example, which by saying, well, the Quran is right when it says that the world was created in time, but that's true theologically, but Aristotle is correct when he says that the world's eternal. So they're both true. Well, that's the end of science. Or let's put it this way, that's the end of discourse. And if there's no discourse, science is not going to emerge. And so what you had in the Islamic world was, Maimonides put it this way. He said, Allah was like the caliph who takes an afternoon ride in his carriage. And when he gets to the gate, he decides whether he'll go right or go left, but nobody knows in advance.
Yeah.
And that's the way if the universe is like that, and basically if Allah is the primary cause of everything that happens, then you have to understand the mind of Allah in order to do science. But if he doesn't know whether he's going to make a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn when he gets out of the palace grounds, how are you supposed to know? So what happens here is basically that the greatest minds in the Islamic world, which I think were the Persians, they just got discouraged and they bailed out of philosophy after Averroes. He was not a Persian. He was all the way over in Spain, but they got into poetry and mysticism.
Without the Logos, you cannot, although I would dispute the figure, because I truly think modern science developed out of the first, out of the centuries before that we call the medieval world, but that's a longer discussion. But that's certainly a good point, because literally what scientific naturalists rely on are axioms that are all Christian axioms and all based on the Logos. And you can't really do science in the long run. You can't do coherent science without starting with the assumption that there is a Logos. If you don't think there's a Logos, you can't have science. If you don't take it seriously,
you have to believe that the universe is an orderly place.
That's right.
If you're patient and your mind can figure out the order of the universe, because they were both created by God according to the same Logos. It goes deeper than that, I would say. Because I don't think you can have science unless you understand the Trinity. Because the Trinity resolved the problem. Plagued classical philosophy. Because with Aristotle, you had a completely transcendent God. But then you have the problem of, well, why does he care about us? And why did he make anything? Why did he do that? And then Plato solved that problem by saying, no, God cares for you, but if he cares for you, well, he's probably not transcendent. So we have the demiurge as a kind of halfway house in which the demiurge, or the worker of the people, he's the one who created the universe, even though he's not completely transcendent. And so you have this procession, this like the turtles all the way down. Well, maybe another demiurge created that demiurge, and blah, blah, blah. And that's not going to work. And so Greek philosophy came to a crash when Aristotle left town because he didn't want to suffer the fate of Socrates. And those issues were never resolved until St. John wrote his gospel, in which he said it began with Greek philosophy.
There you go.
Ein arche, ein ha logos. In the beginning, there was logos. Logos was with God, and logos is God. Now, that was a sentence that changed the entire course of human history.
I agree. And we need to be closing up because we've come up on our hour way too fast. I've really been enjoying this. I'm going to give you a shorthand way I give it to explain people. And don't beat me up too much because I'm not a trained theologian or philosopher. But the way I see it, and basically the concept of the Trinity, which is ultimately mystical and not possible to fully understand, what it gives us is the idea that God the Father is the power, the source from which everything comes. Ultimately, Jesus the Son is the logos, the divine wisdom, the knowledge, the ruling order of the universe, the lawgiver, if you will. And then, of course, the Holy Spirit is the love that's between them. But this also allows us, even though the Trinity is one God, it allows us to, think distinctly about just order of the universe. And that frees us to think of, without mixing it up with other concepts, what is the divine logic order of the universe? That's kind of how I see it. Was that clumsy, or does that sound about right?
No, it's with incarnation, we now have secondary causality. And without secondary causality, there is no science. Because if there's no secondary causality, you're back to trying to figure out the mind of God. And you can't do that, even if it's not the Caliph, even if the real God, because you can't plumb the depths of God's mind. Your mind is too short. You'll never be able to plumb those depths.
But when we have the Logos, we can start saying there are certain things we can say about the mind of God. You can't say everything about the mind of God, but we can say things about God now. That's kind of how I would say.
Based on our understanding of creation, yes.
Exactly. And that's what that concept gives us. That's why it's so powerful. That's why it's so important. And if you still don't understand that when you're listening in the audience, let us know. We may do a whole show on it. So in any case, this has been a real pleasure, Dr. Jones. Everybody, please be sure to check out Culture Wars magazine. You might want to look for the I believe it was October 2017 edition for the one on the new atheists, which is just basically an analysis of what a complete train wreck philosophically the Four Horsemen were. And they were, I'm sorry if you're fans of theirs, but they were nothing philosophically. They're idiots philosophically. And they're not that impressive as scientists either. That's the scary part. Check out Culture Wars magazine at culturewars.com. Please hit us on redpillreligion.com and look for Michael Jones's channel. Be sure to subscribe to that. And God bless everybody. God bless you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you.